Surprise! I've got a new batch of 20 records. So originally, when I first started, changing up the model of how I put out videos, I originally was thinking I would do this at the beginning of each month, kind of showcasing the albums that came out last month. But February and March put out so many albums that halfway through March, I already had 20 records. And things were starting to flow into like the April month. And I'm like, I need to put out one of these before I end up with too much of a backlog. So we're going to get 2 of these in March. So surprise, enjoy. I got lots of records to talk about. The usual kind of bookkeeping, housekeeping things going on here. These are going to be short, first impressions, kind of like bird's eye view of these records, my, general impressions of them, whether I recommend them or not. We've got a plethora of different styles, genres, and bands on here. I'm going to be saying the band at the beginning and end of each of these little reviews. I've also linked time codes in the description so you can jump ahead, but as I do with all these, I recommend that you watch the whole thing because even for a band that you've never heard about, maybe they'll be up your alley. Maybe you'll be pleasantly surprised of a new favorite band that you've never heard about before. So that all being said, these are in alphabetical order. Also, I covered a bunch of, as I'm recording, I haven't released any of them yet, but I've got 4 other albums that I think you guys should check out. The first one was Ninja Sex Party with their album These Nuts, Dirt Poor Robins with their album The Firebird, Whom Gods Destroy with their debut album of Insomnium, and leading the charge for one of my favorite albums of the year was Elmo's debut album of Reconciliation. Those can all be found on my channel. All these records are outstanding. I particularly want to shout out Elmo, spelled A-L-M-O. Absolutely brilliant. You need to check it out. Okay, all that being said, and now done, let's dive into these 20 albums alphabetically sorted by band name, so I'm not giving, favoritism to any of them. We're going to start this all off with Albion with their album Lakesongs of Elbid, I believe is how you pronounce it. This is a prog metal group, very similar to, I guess, a lot of like Arion style of things. I feel like this is what if Ian Anderson had joined a Dream Theater. I don't know, that's like the biggest comparison. The flute plays a very prominent role on a lot of these tracks that I really appreciate, and it's providing some really fun progressive metal, very like symphonic prog metal in that case. I really appreciate the songs Barrett's Privateers. It includes Celtic flavors that I don't hear all that often within the prog metal landscape, and it's a very like almost Akkadian progressive metal outfit. Like I'm thinking of some of the things from The Human Equation from Arion, and I wish more bands would do this. Like I love Akkadian songs, and I wish more of that was found on here. The album overall, outside of a couple tracks here and there, was, I don't want to say it was mainly forgettable, but I was really hoping for a little bit more of those really big gems. But as I mentioned, Barrett's Privateers, brilliant song. I wish there was more of this on this album. I would definitely give this one a listen if you're looking to listen to more accessible prog metal. I find like prog metal is very heavy and very like brutal nowadays, which I love, but for a lot of people, that's not quite their slice of cake. So I would recommend this one. And that album was Albion with their album Lakesongs of Edbin, or Edbin. It's down in the description. Duck by the Aristocrats. I love the Aristocrats. And the Aristocrats I always find are more form over function for me. Like it's definitely looking at a brilliant and beautiful painting without too much substance. This is very like, their music is usually very abstract in that sense. It's all instrumental, and we've got some of my absolute favorite individuals that are playing on this. Marco Minimum on drums, Guthrie Govin. I always want, part of this is like, that's not right, but it is Guthrie. Guthrie? Guthrie Govan, on lead guitars, both of whom played on my two favorite records from Steven Wilson, Hand Cannot Erase, as well as The Raven That Refused to Sing. And they are joined by Brian Beller on bass. You know, they're all very alliterative, both the double names. Stan Lee would have been very proud about that. Anyway, this is their first like concept record, very noir, DuckTales kind of thing, all about like this anthropomorphic duck case, and it's a lot of fun. This one's probably their strongest work and also their most cohesive work, and I think a lot of that has to do with the grounding of a concept behind it. I honestly love concept instrumental tracks and concept instrumental albums. You know, you got like the Snow Goose from Camel, where most of the time this instrumental movements would be hard to digest, hard to remember, hard to hold on to. But with this kind of concept leading the album through, you have these touchstones, you have these standout moments that you're able to kind of grab onto and be like, ah, yes, now I remember that aspect. And I love just where this album goes, you know, like I love so many moments on this album. There's a lot of ebb and flow on this album. And you can tell, like, these are individuals who are masters at their craft playing at the peak of their career. So, yeah, I can't praise this album enough. If you haven't listened to an Aristocrats album before, this is a great moment to get into them. I had a blast with that. If you look for some really good instrumental progressive metal stuff, this is a lot more grounded than some of the other progressive metal instrumental works that are out there. So, yeah, I would give Duck by the Aristocrats a spin. Borknagar with their album of Fall. This is a really fun power progressive metal outfit, really big sound. It kind of reminds me of like if Epica or Symphony X had just a little bit more teeth to it, you know, a little bit more of a harsher sound. I love the longer stretches of music that is found on here that really allow the tracks to build and form. You have like the noodling of the guitars, you have the atmosphere of the synths, really elevating the music up that I really enjoy. And I also love that they are able to do this without feeling generic or feeling derivative of a lot of the things that kind of came before. I would recommend this for anyone that's looking for some great prog metal with a little bit of a flirtation of a symphonic metal and a power metal aspect to it. And for somebody that's been craving more Symphony X from, you know, a band that I probably won't be getting any new music from anytime soon, this was a great satisfaction of that need. So yeah, I would give this one a spin. That was Fall by Borknagar. Sparks in the Darkness by Cephid, I believe is how you pronounce that. This is an electronic album in the very same vein that like Jean-Michel Jarre or Tangerine Dream was kind of playing with. Great vibes, great atmospheres. It's very kind of low key in that sense. You know, I find with some electronica, it can get a little too much, like a little too EDM for me. But I love the textures and the shapes that are found within this music. It's very meditative and transient in this sense. And I would really give this a spin. If you're looking for something that's like a cool down, something to just mellow out to, this is a really great spot. It's not harsh. It's not heavy. It's just vibes. So yeah, I would definitely give Sparks in the Darkness a try from Cephid. Simulacra from Cloud People. This is another electronica album, much more in the vein of like kind of like a more mellow style of Daft Punk. Like if Daft Punk didn't try to make dance music and they were just trying to make vibes and atmospheric music, I think this is what you get. It's a little bit harsher as well. There's a lot more deeper tones that are found on this one. A little bit more of like trance kind of music in that sense. And I really love the fact that it really does push the music forward. It integrates a lot of sounds and textures and atmospheres that I really enjoy. And once again, we're channeling that late 70s electronica of Jean-Michel Jarre or even like Evangelis, like that very synth-led style of electronic music. But there's also a lot more of like this jazz experimentation impressionistic side that's found on it. Something from like jazz.com or something along those lines that I really like. It almost has like this lo-fi vaporwave feel to it as well, without being like straight up the hip hop lo-fi beats, you know? It's got a little bit more of textures on that. The one thing that kind of pulls me out a little bit is the spoken word aspect, specifically on tracks like Area 51, where it has that same kind of spoken word that's at the end of Tool's Lateralis album. It's the same kind of, it's the exact same thing. Like, I was listening to it being like, that's from Tool. That's the Tool Lateralis. I don't know if Tool was the one that wrote it, or if it's just this found transcript or whatnot. But yeah, it was one of those like, I don't know about that. But yeah, I would really listen to this one with a very good set of headphones, kind of late at night, close the eyes, and just let the music trance you into a really nice state. Yeah, I would give this one a try, even if you're not a fan of electronic music. I had a blast with this one, and outside of those little bit of nitpicks, it's a very solid record. So I would give this one a try, and that was Cloud People's record, Simulacra. Dreamwalkers, Inc. with their album, The First Tragedy of Collier, I believe is how you pronounce that one. This was an album that crossed my desk recently from last year that I said that I would review. And it's a progressive metal record, a concept record, with a number of spoken word aspects that kind of allow the narrative of the story to unfold. And I really appreciate that. I wish more concept records would do that, to have these kind of like little vignettes of almost like a radio play that's found on it. Gandalf's Fist did this to a extremely beautiful moment with their Clockwork Fable and Prelude to a Clockwork. Absolutely love that. And I just wish that the music that's found on this was a little bit better. You know, it was just very generic progressive metal music that never really got me all that excited for what I was listening to. They do play with the concept, and, you know, the music does emphasize and reinforce whatever narrative flow is going within the music at that time, or within the story at that time. But I never really felt all that connected to. And the story, unfortunately, as the title says, The First Tragedy of Collier, was kind of like the part one. And I felt like as the story of this woman was starting to take shape and take fold, it stopped. You know, it's kind of like getting into a fantasy novel, not realizing that it's a series, having all these plot points being plunked down without having the satisfaction, I keep saying satisfaction, the satisfaction of having a well-earned story arc. It's just kind of like a story graph. Like, it's a story slope rather than a story arc. And I was kind of saddened about that one. So, yeah. I mean, I would listen to this one if you're really craving some more progressive metal with a concept record. Like, that's kind of the only way I would recommend this one. Otherwise, I would honestly steer clear of this one. It doesn't really add anything new to the landscape. And outside of some pretty serviceable and pretty good vocal performances on this one, the music itself is kind of generic and degenerative, and I'm just like, I can't even say it's fine. But anyway, that's my take on Dreamwalkers, Inc. and their album, The First Tragedy of Collier. Maybe part 2 will be a little bit better if they decide to put out part 2. Everything, and their album Mountainhead. This one's getting a lot of praise. This one's getting a lot of recognition. Last year, they put out an album that played a lot with AI and kind of making music along that kind of lens, and I was less than excited about that one. I can't say that for this one. This one earns all the hype that it's been receiving. I've really been enjoying this one. There's a lot being thrown on the wall, and most of it works, which is really hard to say when a band is playing with so many different things. I love the electronic flavors that are found on this one, and I'm finding a lot of bands nowadays are really emulating and channeling the 80s style of music without it falling within the pitfalls of the 80s music, where I just found it very bland and very uninteresting. These are much more like, there's a lot of textures, there's a lot of colors, and it's anything but uninteresting. This is very interesting and very exciting stuff that I like on this one. I found myself grooving a lot to the soundscapes and the music that's found on this one, a lot more than almost anything that everything has put out up to this point. Even though there's a lot of music that's found on this one, it goes by fairly quickly, which kind of goes to show that they're masters of timing. They're masters of pacing on records and pacing in sounds. You know, there's, as I mentioned, there's a lot of music that's found on this one, and it doesn't lag. Like, it doesn't feel like, oh man, another one, or oh man, they're trying something new. Everything works very well, and I found myself really diving into it. And I love the fact that this album presents something very different, very new, while still finding it like very familiar and immediately recognizable. So yeah, I would recommend this one if you're looking for like the next big sound in indie rock. This is where you're probably going to find it. And that was Mountainhead with Everything, or sorry, that was Everything and their album Mountainhead. In Waves by Fall of Leviathan. This is a post-rock metal kind of outfit that I absolutely loved. You know, like they're blending the post-rock soundscape in a little bit more of a meaty, heavy, brutal soundscape. This was kind of what I was wishing bands like Explosion in the Sky would do after their Take Care album, with really emphasizing and embracing that heavier aspect that was coming out in the mid-2010s. It's kind of giving me the flavors of Deaf Heaven, where they're taking that post-rock sound and blending it with like a black metal. These guys are doing it in more of like a symphonic metal or a progressive metal aspect that I really, really love. It's almost as if they saw what, you know, Deaf Heaven was doing and saying, well, instead of it being a black metal, let's just do it with power metal or brutal metal. And I really like that. I love the guitar textures that are found that create a subtle atmosphere, but leaves the music both airy as well as grounded, which in cases like post-rock, it's kind of a balancing act, right? Because the guitar works are always so airy and so atmospheric that it's hard to be grounded. But because they're kind of utilizing that grounding of the harsher sounds, it provides a really good listen and one that I would highly recommend. So yeah, can't recommend this more. That was In Waves by Fall of Leviathan. Ihsahn, self-titled, I almost said debut, but it's not, their self-titled album of Ihsahn. This is a new band for me, and I know a lot of people know about Ihsahn. This is my first time listening to it, and I thoroughly love it. And I also really hope that I'm pronouncing it properly. I went on Google to be like, how do you pronounce this? And it's like Ihsahn. And I'm like, okay, I'm taking your word for it. Don't kill me. Yeah, this is kind of like the closest that we'll get to a straight up classical metal outfit. I love the use of the orchestra and the symphonic styles to it without it feeling like the big soundtracky style that I feel like a lot of progressive metal bands sound whenever they go into the symphonic side of things. It feels so fresh and so original when you're playing with this one. I love how these classical instruments are weaved seamlessly into the metal style. It's really taking that symphonic metal that like Symphony X or Epica or Apocalyptica would do, but instead of that just being kind of like the soundscapes to have as like the metal style, they're saying no, we're going to take that as like the overall flavor and the overall atmosphere. We're taking the vibes of classical music and putting it into metal rather than having that metal vibes being played more like that. And it's much more orchestral in that sense. So I would say that instead of it being symphonic metal, it would be more orchestral metal. And I absolutely adored it and I absolutely loved it. So this one gets a really big recommendation for me. This one gets the note seal of approval. And I just wish that there wasn't so much good music that came out this year. I could dedicate a little bit more time with this one. But there wasn't quite enough oomph to keep me coming back for more, if I'm being perfectly honest. Still great, still loved it, and I highly recommend this one. And that was Ihsahn's self-titled album. Jacob Collier with his album Djesse Volume 4. I've always kind of kept my finger on the pulse with Jacob Collier. I never really felt as connected with him as some of my contemporaries do. I don't know. There was just something about him that just never quite clicked with me. And the same can kind of be said about this album, even though I would say that this is probably his most mature, his most realized, and his most experimental album. And he's doing the most amount of things that work on this album, which I really appreciate. I haven't really heard anything that is so multi-genre as this, outside of maybe Omnium Gatherum from King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. But this is like really shifting gears from genre to genre, and not ever really landing on one style, which can make this feel a little bit of a disjointed and a little bit of a grab bag of album. Like, it almost feels like a compilation road mix where 5 people were able to contribute to it and nobody was given any kind of parameters. So it does feel a little bit disjointed in that sense. And I mean, you're having features from Ed Sheeran as well as Stormzy on the same track. So it's like, whoa, it never really feels completely like these are from a different artist. That's the one thing that kind of unifies this. This always feels like it's a Jacob Collier sound. It always feels like it's a Jacob signature moment, you know, without it being completely out of place. On the one hand, I love when bands and artists are able to genre bent and, you know, not limit themselves to one box. But on the other hand, you can't really put this on for some light, easy listening. This is something that you want to sit down and listen to. So yeah, this is for anyone who loves that kind of progress in making music and kind of seeing what kind of can be done as music as an art form. But I wouldn't necessarily recommend it to just like the average music listener. So yeah, that's what I've got for Djesse Volume 4 from Jacob Collier. Okay, we're at the halfway mark. We've got Jimmy Keegan's self-titled debut album. Jimmy Keegan was, with, I believe, Pattern Seeking Animals and definitely with Spock's Beard. And it's definitely channeling both of those projects. I wouldn't even say this is quite as gripping as Pattern Seeking Animals, which is kind of funny because I've never really felt all that excited about Pattern Seeking Animals, but it definitely has moments that I really latch onto. Jimmy is throwing a lot into this program and into this project to kind of really say something on this one, and most of it works. It definitely has some memorable and catchy stuff. My mind goes to Like Platinum, where the chorus gets stuck in my head no matter how many times I try to get rid of it. And luckily, there was no lull in this album either, even though it was a little bit on the long side. It's pretty great from start to finish in that sense. I just wish there were a few more big hooks, a few more banging moments to make me want to come back to this album. Because as it stands right now, there wasn't quite enough to make me excited to go back for more. It was a really good sit down and listen for a couple of times, but kind of like a juicy fruit. Once I got the immediate flavor out of my mouth, it didn't really do too much for me. But that being said, I would still recommend checking this one out if you're a fan of Pattern Seeking Animals or Spock's Beard. Spock's Beard in like the later couple of albums, then I would definitely give this one a spin. Otherwise, I would kind of move on because there's a lot of really good stuff out there right now. And that album was Jimmy Keegan's self-titled debut album. Keys to the Ancestral Gate and Mystic Doors 2 from Keys to the Ancestral Gate and Mystic Doors. Yeah, I've been diving deep into some really gnarly black metal, and when I saw that Keys to the Ancestral Gate and Mystic Doors put out a second album, you know I got to get into that. If you're looking for that gnarly, like, record on a shoestring and tin can sound system, you're going to love this one. The production is non-existent. It literally sounds like they were standing around a single mic in a garage. And there's a part of me that loves that. You know, I love this raw, this gnarly and grainy soundscapes to it. It's got that sludge to it that I absolutely love. this is the style of music that I will like really mess with late at night when, you know, everybody else has gone to bed and I just need some of that raw metal works. This isn't necessarily for the faint of heart as well. You know, you got the screaming, you got the yelling, you got those like really abrasive vocal styles. But it's more atmosphere than anything else, which is really saying something. And I just love that there's like zero dynamic in anything. Everything is so flat, but it's powerful. It's gnarly. It's harsh. If any of what I've said seems interesting to you, I would really check this one out. They've definitely developed and matured since their first album, and they're really playing with their sound and really kind of coming into their own. So yeah, this was a recommendation. I love this one, but I can also say like take this one with an extreme grain of salt. So that was Keys of the Ancestral Gate and Mystic Doors 2 by Keys, the Ancestral Gate and Mystic Doors. I would also say best band logo ever. Like I want that on a t-shirt. Loss of Life by MGMT. I gotta be perfectly honest with you guys. I've never been, I've never listened to MGMT outside of just what I've been exposed to by popular media. And so this was my first real sit down with MGMT, and it was a really fun experience. I then went back and listened to some of their bigger, more well-known stuff, and I'm like, oh, I really shouldn't have been sleeping on these guys. They're a great indie pop, dream pop stuff. Like they were doing stuff 10 years ago that bands are only now starting to catch up to. And I feel like I really missed a big train. Like this is some music that I would have loved about 10 years ago. Yeah, overall, after a handful of listens to this one though, I was a little bit less than stellar about it. Outside of Bubblegum Dog, a lot of the tracks on here are very melodramatic, very somber, very like slow and moody and romantic. And so if that's your jam, then absolutely have it. It's just for me, unless it's extremely engaging and there's a lot to sink my teeth into, I just find myself moving on to some other things. Now, that being said, the opening and closing track of The Loss of Life Part 1 and 2, which I love the fact that it opens with Part 2 and closes with Part 1. Mwah! Love that. More of that, please. I absolutely loved this, and that is some of the best music that I've heard all year. Part 1 and Part 2, so moving, so, like, emotive. I absolutely loved that aspect of these tracks. I just wish that the rest of the slower, somber moments on this album emulated this heartful gush of passion I didn't quite feel. And it's not necessarily to say that it was weaker or anything. I just didn't feel as connected to that. So, yeah, that's what I've got. I would still kind of recommend this one. I would still check it out, but I wouldn't go running out for it. And that was Loss of Life by MGMT. Welcome to the Machine by Monkey 3. So this is a psychedelic rock outfit, definitely more in the rocker side of things. I'm getting flavors of, like, again, the usual rounds of suspects when I'm talking about psychedelic rock, the Motorpsychos, the King Buffalo. And I really enjoyed this one. You know, this one had some really lengthy tracks, some really great jam sessions on this one. The only thing that I would say is like, was the homages to Pink Floyd that were more than just the title of this album. There are a few points that I'm like, that's just time. Kind of cut and paste onto this one. And instead of doing something different with it, instead of like recontextualizing it or playing with it a little bit, it was basically just a cut and paste. And I'm not a big fan of that. I like to see the homages be flirted with, be played with, done something different. But it only happens a handful of times on this record, and it's not enough to completely nix this album in my listening experiences. I love the build-ups and the payoffs, and I also like where they go once they leave those homages and the influences behind. That's where this album really shines and really provides something that I absolutely love. So as a prog lover, I really enjoy this one, and I highly, highly recommend this one. It has some of the most satisfying build-ups and payoffs that I've heard this year, specifically in the psychedelic rock landscapes. So yeah, this one gets a recommendation for me. I would check this one out. That was Monkey 3 and their album Welcome to the Machine. Chronicle 2, Hybergenesis by Mountaincaller. So Mountaincaller was a new one for me. I, found them kind of on the interwebs and saw that, this is a little bit of a concept record. It's part 2. Went back and listened to part 1. And I love the fact that this is almost a purely instrumental album. There are a few moments of vocalizations and a few moments of singing here and there. But for the most part, it's pretty much purely instrumental. And the thing that really sets these guys apart is that they're flirting with where that line is between rock music and metal music, and kind of planting their flag right at the border on the rock side of things. They never really get into the metal side, but they're always flirting with it. They're always like looking over at the landscape and being, oh, I want to take that, or I want to take that, without ever really being fully metal in that sense. And I really, really appreciate that. It's almost as if they're using the spirit of metal in a rock expression that I really enjoy. I love their moments that feel a little bit more on the stoner rock without it feeling sludgy, which I really appreciate, because it's so easy to go into the sludgy aspect of stoner rock. So I love the fact that they bring it over into the rock, really stick it in that ground once again, flirting with the style of sludge metal in that sense. I also love that, even though these tracks never really go past like the 6-minute mark, they're always really developing the song. They're always bringing things forward. And I really appreciate and really enjoy what they're doing with the music on this one. This one doesn't necessarily also like break the mold. This is more of like an experimental kind of listen in that sense. And I wish that there was kind of a little bit more of a signature sound that's found on this. But for what we have, it's still a very enjoyable listen, and one that I would recommend if you're looking for something that kind of flirts with this gray area between metal and rock without it sounding like grunge or sounding like some of the post-rock stuff that we've gotten recently. So yeah, I would recommend checking this one out. That was Mountaincaller and their album Chronicle 2, Hybergenesis. All right, so I've looked countlessly for how to pronounce this one because I wasn't even going to try to pronounce it, but Google isn't helping me. So I believe the band is pronounced Nimetön Hauta, and the album is Pimeyteen Ayaki Joki. It's in the description. Go and check this one out. This is a black metal record from Finland, and yeah, it's great. It's very atmospheric, and once again utilizes those harsh vocals in a way that paints a mosaic of colors in a very soothing way without it being brutal. And it's so weird to say that these harsh vocals that uses screaming and growling and all those things can be soothing, but here it works. It feels like this is kind of like the next step in this black metal post-rock landscape that was carved out by bands like Death Heaven. And I can really recommend this one. I had a blast with this one. I returned to it a number of times, and I think you'll really dig it, especially if you're into more of this atmospheric black metal stuff. Give this one a try. It won't let you down. I'm not going to try to pronounce this one again. It's in the description. Go and check this one out. North Sea Echoes and their album Really Good Terrible Things. So this is another side project from Ray Adler from Fate's Warning. And yeah, this one feels a little bit more like a singer-songwriter with a little bit of an electronic approach rather than like a progressive metal outfit that we got from like the late 80s and early 90s with Fate's Warning. It's very mellow when you compare it to Ray's past work, and I don't even want to call this one a snooze fest, as there are a few moments on here that are kind of interesting. Like the mission feels like something out of Arion 010100101. Like specifically, I'm thinking of Beneath the Waves. And I like his use of electronica on a lot of these tracks. But that being said, I was hoping for a little bit more teeth on a lot of these tracks and ended up kind of drifting away from this album more than paying attention to it. So yeah, I was hoping for a little bit more. This one was a little bit of a disappointment considering Ray's past work, but it's still enough to be interesting. So yeah, that was North Sea Echoes and their album Really Good Terrible Things. The Metaphysical Tech Support Hotline by Topiary Creatures. Topiary. Anyway, this is a prog rock, leaning more onto the rock side of things, and it kind of continues the trend that I'm seeing with bands like Soup or The World is a Beautiful Place and I'm No Longer Afraid to Die, where it's kind of at this crossroads between indie rock, indie pop, and early emo, late pop punk. It's a little bit more heavy than The World is a Beautiful Place and I'm No Longer Afraid to Die, as well as Soup, with a little bit of darker themes and overtones that I wasn't quite hearing with bands such as that. But it also has that same kind of energy and flow. I also love how fun this album can feel, blending those themes and overtones with heavier motifs and this more heavenly female vocalist that I really, really love, especially on tracks like God is a Scared Kid in a Middle School Science Fair. It provides the exact vibe that I'm feeling a lot of this music is kind of circling lately, and it kind of like finally dips itself down into the maelstrom and the vortex of where it's been circling for so long. It's simplistic yet dark and heavy. I've been grooving to a lot of these tracks as they feel like more fun modernizations of those pop punk bands of the like late 90s, like Blink-182 and Sum 41. Even though this track and this album is shorter, huzzah, let's keep that ball rolling, there's still a lot of really good music that's found on this. You know, this is quality over quantity. And I love the fact that as a shorter album, there's a lot of music that is being presented on this. And I'm really hoping that we can get more of this style of albums out. Shorter albums with more music, that's what I'm hoping for. So yeah, that's what I've got for Topiary Creatures and their album, The Metaphysical Tech Support Hotline. Messenger's Quest from Triton Project. So this is a prog metal debut album, and we've got not one, but two plus 20 epics on this record. And this might be one of the only times I'll say this. It might be a bit much. I'm not quite sure if they needed both of these tracks to be as long as they are, and I don't think that they needed this album to be as long as they were. As I mentioned with Topiary Creatures, shorter albums, more music. That's what I was kind of hoping for this one. I also think that the structure of this album is off. Having the two big epics be back to back like this doesn't quite work in the same vein that, say, like Southern Empire did with their Civilization, where they had, you know, two meaty tracks back to back. This one, I feel like if those two were split up so that it started and ended with the big tracks, I think it might have worked a little bit longer. But yeah, I was kind of hoping for a little bit more of a ta-da moment on any of these tracks, because I just felt like these two big epics, they wandered the landscape without really landing anywhere, you know, but for it was still great, you know, like they're still developing, you know, they're still quite green. You can feel that green in a lot of the tracks that are found on here. As I mentioned, I just wish that some of these bigger moments had that, as I mentioned, the ta-da moment that I didn't quite feel on this record. So I would still give this one a spin. This one might be up your alley, especially if you're craving those big epics in progressive metal music. I would give this one a spin. Just for me, it was a little bit much without delivering anything behind it. You know, lots of promise, not a lot of follow through. But yeah, so that was Triton Project and their album, The Messenger's Quest. Finally, we come to the last one, which is Volcandra and their album, The Way of the Ancients. This album is some great death metal. If you are looking for some great dank face moments, this album has you covered. There's some amazing melodies as well as some really good melodic moments that are quite hypnotic and hypnotizing. So it's not just brutal from start to finish. There's a lot of ebb and flows that I really appreciate, because that's the one thing about a lot of the metal stuff. It's like if you stay in the same lane the whole time, it can kind of get monotonous, can kind of get repetitive. This has quite a number of the ebb and flows. I like the vocals. They're quite brutal. They're quite harsh, and always warrants that kind of like, kind of moments that I really appreciate and really love. As I mentioned, they know how to balance the aggressive side with the melodic moments, so you don't get bogged down with one side or the other. This is a great album for anyone looking for that brutal death metal with a great blast beats, tasty guitar looks, and bone-crushing lyrics. Honestly, this one's a great one for sure, and I would highly recommend it. And I'm glad that I was able to end this whole thing off on a fairly high note. So that's my 20 albums for the first half of March. I hope you guys found something really tasty and really fun. I covered quite a bit of the landscape on here, and I know my second half is going to cover even more, so get ready for that. I have noticed that my February one didn't quite get the upturn that I was hoping for. I'm hoping that these guys get at least like 1,000 views, and this one's, my February one's sitting at about 700, so if we can elevate that a little bit more, share this one around, like this video, as well as, comment down below which one you found most interesting, which one you hope to check out. It just helps it get out and, get recognized, because that's what I'm kind of hoping for this one. These videos, I'm hoping kind of, give enough of a flavor tester for people to kind of find their next favorite album. So yeah, if you could share this one around, I would really be appreciative of that. And that's where I'm going to leave it. So thank you all so much for watching. Again, like, share, subscribe, comment down below, and share this one to anybody that is like, hey, you were asking for some music recommendation. Here are 20 albums that maybe you'll dig. It would really mean the world for me. So, and just by you watching it, you're already helping. So thank you all so much for watching. That's why you guys are always definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.